We will now discuss the general principles of taxation as seen in the syllabus of the 2022 bar exams. Specifically, we'll be tackling the doctrines in taxation. Let's start. What is the Lifeblood theory? The Lifeblood theory considers taxes as the lifeblood of the nation through which the government agencies continue to operate and with which the state effects its functions for the welfare of its constituents, based on the case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Court of Appeals. Based on the case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus ALGE, taxes are the lifeblood of the government and so should be collected without unnecessary hindrance. On the other hand, such collection should be made in accordance with law, as any arbitrariness will negate the very reason of government itself. What are the sources of tax laws? The 1987 Constitution, legislation, tax treaties and tax ordinances, administrative regulations and rulings or opinions of tax officials, including opinion of the Secretary of Justice, judicial decisions, interpretations of American courts, based on the case of Banyas versus CA. How are tax laws construed, where the language used is plain? Based on the case of Sealand Services versus Court of Appeals, no interpretation is needed. All has to be done is to apply it in every case that falls within its terms. How are tax laws construed where there is doubt? Tax laws must be construed strictly against the government and in favor of the taxpayer. This is because taxes are burdens on the taxpayer and should not be unduly imposed or presumed beyond what the statute expressly or clearly import, based on the case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Philippine-American Accident Insurance. How is legislative intention treated in terms of construction of tax laws? Legislative intention must be considered. Tax statutes should be received in a sensible construction such as it will give effect to the legislative intention and so as to avoid an unjust or absurd conclusion, based on the case of People versus Rivera. In construction of tax laws, public purpose is always presumed, true or false. True. This is in consonance with the doctrine that, like any other statute, tax legislation carries with a presumption of constitutionality. Again, this is in consonance with the doctrine that, like any other statute, tax legislation carries a presumption of constitutionality. Tax laws prevail over general laws. Again, tax laws prevail over general laws. True or false? True. Tax laws are special laws. They prevail over general laws. Republic versus Gancayco. What is the general rule on construction of tax exemption? Again, what is the general rule on the construction of tax exemption? Tax exemptions are regarded as derogation of sovereign authority and to be construed stris sine juris against the person or entity against the exemption. Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus Eastern Telecoms. What are the exceptions to the strict construction of tax exemptions? 1. When the statute granting exemptions provide for liberal construction thereof. 2. In case of special taxes relating to special cases and affecting only special classes of persons. 3. If exemptions refer to public property. 4. In cases of exemptions granted to traditional persons who are exempt, such as religious, charitable, and educational institutions. 3. In cases of exemptions in favor of government, its political subdivisions or instrumentalities. 6th, if the government fails within the purview of exemption by clear legislative intent. Again, if the taxpayer falls within the purview of exception by clear legislative intent. What are the rules on the construction of taxing exclusions? The rule that exemption should be applied in stesimi juris against the taxpayer and liberally in favor of the government applies equally to tax exclusions. PLDT versus City of Davao. How are penal provisions of tax laws construed? These are given strict construction so as not to extend the plain terms thereof that might create offenses by mere implications not so intended by the legislative body. Again, these are given strict construction so as not to extend the plain terms thereof that might create offenses by mere implication not so intended by the legislative body. People versus Martin. What is the doctrine of prospectivity of tax laws? The general rule under the Civil Code that laws shall have prospective application also applies to tax laws. Thus, tax laws are prospective in application, unless their retroactive application is expressly provided. Commission of Internal Revenue versus Philippine National Bank. In tax rulings, what is the principle of non-retroactivity? Under the principle of non-retroactivity, tax rulings, under the principle of non-retroactivity of tax rulings, any revocation, modification, or reversal of any of the rules and regulations, or any of the rulings or circulars promulgated by the Commission of Internal Revenue shall not be given retroactive application if the revocation, modification, or reversal will be prejudicial to the taxpayers. Section 246 of the NRSC as amended. Again, if the revocation, modification, or reversal will be prejudicial to the taxpayer, it shall not be given retroactive application. In tax rulings, what are exceptions to the principle of non-retroactivity? 1. Where the taxpayer deliberately misstates or omits material facts from his return or any document required by him by the BIR. Where the facts subsequently gathered by the BIR are materially different from the facts on which the ruling is based. Last, when the taxpayer acted in bad faith. Section 246 NIRC as amended. What is the doctrine of imprescriptibility of taxes? Unless expressly provided by law, the statutes of limitation do not run against the state. Again, unless expressly provided by law, the statutes of limitation do not run against the state. Republic versus Sablaza. What is double taxation? Double taxation is defined as taxing the same person twice with the same jurisdiction for the same thing. Victoria's Milling versus Municipality of Victoria. Is double taxation unconstitutional? No, there is no constitutional prohibition against double taxation in the Philippines. It is something not favored, but it is permissible provided some other constitutional requirement is not violated, such as the requirement that taxes must be uniform. Villanueva versus Iloilo. What are the two kinds of taxation? First is the direct double taxation, or double taxation in the strict sense. Second is indirect double taxation, or double taxation in the broad sense. What constitutes direct double taxation? In order to constitute double taxation in the objectionable or prohibited sense, the same property must be taxed twice when it should be taxed only once. Both taxes must be imposed on the same property or subject matter for the same purpose with the same taxing authority within the same jurisdiction or taxing district during the same taxing period, and they must be the same kind of character of tax. Villanueva versus Iloilo. Again, the same property must be taxed twice when it should be taxed once. Both taxes must be imposed on the same property or subject matter for the same purpose with the same taxing authority within the same jurisdiction or taxing district during the same taxing period, and must be the same kind or character of tax. What constitutes direct double taxation? Indirect double taxation arises in the absence of any one or more of the elements of direct double taxation. What are the modes of eliminating double taxation? By imposing tax credits, by reducing the Philippine income tax rate, by imposing tax exemptions, tax deductions, and entering into tax treaties. What is international juridical double taxation? It is the imposition of comparable taxes in two or more states on the same taxpayer in respect of the same subject matter and for identical periods. How is international juridical double taxation eliminated? The two contracting states should enter into a tax treaty in order to eliminate double taxation. Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus S.C. Johnson. What is the reason for avoiding international juridical double taxation? The apparent rationale for doing away with double taxation is to encourage the free flow of goods and services and the movement of capital, technology, and persons between countries, conditions deemed vital in creating a robust and dynamic economy. Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus S.C. Johnson. What are forms of escape from taxation? Shifting of tax burden, tax avoidance, tax evasion, capitalization, transformation, and tax exemption. What is tax exemption? Tax exemption is the grant of immunity, express or implied, to particular persons or corporations of a particular class from a tax which persons or corporations generally within the same state or taxing district are obliged to pay. It is the freedom from a charge or burden which others are subjected. Relinquishment of taxation may be presumed, true or false. False. The power of taxation is a high prerogative of sovereignty. The relinquishment is never presumed. In the case of Flora Cement Corporation versus Gorospe. Any claim of exemption from the tax statute should be construed in favor of the taxpayer. True or false? False. Any claim for exemption from the tax statute should be construed against the taxpayer. Tax exemptions are highly favored and may almost be said to be directly contrary to the intention of the tax laws. True or false? False. Tax exemptions are highly disfavored and may almost be said to be directly contrary to the intention of tax laws. He who claims tax exemptions must be able to justify his claim or right. True or false? True. Based on the case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus P.J. Keener Limited. What is the general rule on revocation of tax exemptions? A grant of exemption is an act of liberality, which could be taken back by the government. Since taxation is the rule and exemption is the exception, the exemption may thus be withdrawn at the pleasure of the taxing authority. Based on the case of Mactan Cebu International Airport versus Marcos. When are tax exemptions irrevocable? The only exception to the rule on revocability of tax exemptions is where the exemption was granted to private parties based on material consideration of mutual nature, which then becomes contractual and is thus covered by the non-impairment claim of the Constitution. Cebu International Airport Authority versus Marcos. What is the Doctrine of Equitable Recoupment? A tax presently assessed against a taxpayer may be recouped or set off against a tax illegally or erroneously collected or overpaid. Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus UST. Is the Doctrine of Equitable Recoupment applicable in the Philippines? No, this is not. This is a common law principle and is not binding in our courts. There is nothing in our laws authorizing its acceptance and application because if it will be allowed, both the collecting agency and the taxpayer might be tempted to delay and neglect the pursuit of their respective claims within the period prescribed by law. Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus UST. When does compensation or set-off take place? When two persons in their own right are creditors and debtors of each other. Article 1278 Civil Code. What is the general rule on compensation or set-off of taxes? The general rule is that no set-off is admissible against the demands for taxes levied for general or local government purposes, since tax liability is illegal, not a contractual obligation. Taxes cannot be subject to compensation because the government and the taxpayer are not creditors and debtors of each other. Felix Mining versus Commissioner of Internal Revenue. When may taxes be subject to offsetting? The exception to the general rule that taxes may be subject to compensation or set-off: 1. When the determination of the taxpayer's liability is intertwined with the resolution of the claim for tax refund of erroneously or illegally collected taxes under Section 299 of the NARC, and where both claims of the government and taxpayer against each other have already become due and demandable and fully liquidated.